think of what led you to come to the
JPL.
archives
Yeah.
and talk about it.
Okay. My name's John Bluth. It's Dr. John Bluth. I have a PhD in U.S. history, and as I left graduate school, there weren't very many places to work as a historian directly. So I started working as an oral historian, where I interview people and talk to them, get their first-hand accounts of what happened to them. And then kind of drifted by chance into archives, where I became a manuscripts cataloger, a sound archivist, audio archivist, and then moved on a bit and became a director of a public library. Came back to archives again more recently, and about 5 years ago came here to JPL after my family relocated to California, and was hired as an oral historian, and almost by default became a historian because I needed to know about the past of JPL in order to ask good questions. And one of the things then that resulted from that was finding out about the people who had worked here and who had been here. And that included Jack Parsons and several others.
Excellent. Could you tell us, in your words, what the Jet Propulsion Lab is?
Sure. JPL, as it is known, is about 50 years old. It was founded in the 1940s as a wartime research laboratory doing rocket research, propulsion research, and mainly receiving its money from Army Ordnance. In 1959, January 1st, Army Ordnance turned JPL over to the newly formed National Aeronautics and Space Administration. JPL is a part of the California Institute of Technology. It is a laboratory owned and operated by them as far as the personnel are concerned, whereas the buildings and the land are owned by NASA. And we are called a federally funded research and development institute. The things that we do now, one of the former directors said we started out at the tail of the rocket working on propulsion, and now we've moved up to the head of the rocket, working on what you carry at the top of the launch vehicle. And since we became a part of NASA, we have become the center for the non-manned exploration of outer space, or the robotic exploration of the planets, which we do very well, which we have done major projects over the last 30 years involving the Mariner series to Mars and Venus, Voyager that is still going, that went to Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, providing us the only pictures that we've had of those planets, until the newer projects that we've been a part of. Magellan, which used synthetic aperture radar to look underneath the clouds of Venus at its surface, and the Galileo probe that went to Jupiter. And we now have flying the Cassini probe that in a couple of years will reach Saturn and its moons and look at it and see what we can find. Science and technology, computer science, imaging at a distance, receiving radio signals of incredibly low magnitude, and being able to listen to them, understand them, and present that information. JPL is a neat place.
Great. Now, I wonder if you could talk to us about, for a second, the founders of JPL.
Okay. In 1936, in 1935, in fact, fall of 35, there was a lecture given by a graduate student about the rocket work of a man in Germany by the name of Eugen Sanger. A couple of fellows not associated with Caltech went to that lecture. They had been shooting off in their backyard here in Pasadena some powder rockets, little tiny sky rockets, if you will. Solid fuel, zip, zip, up in the sky. And they were interested in broadening their understanding of both what they were doing and increasing their capabilities. They went to this lecture, listened to what happened. After the lecture, went up and talked to the fellow who gave it, by the name, his name's Bolle. And he said, well, why don't you talk to my professor, Theodore von Karman. Von Karman was a was trained in Europe and had come to Caltech in the 1930s, and he headed a thing called the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory, a research institution within Caltech. The two guys from the town their names were Jack Parsons and Ed Forman. Parsons could be characterized as a explosives chemist, self-taught, experience only, worked with skyrockets and worked with a guy that did fireworks over in Glendale, knew that. Ed Forman was a good mechanic, knew how to use a good metal lathe, make fine pieces of equipment. And he and Parsons had got together, known each other since the 8th grade, been friends, and had worked together on different things. The two of them went to see von Karman, and von Karman's nice guy that he was, being as important as he was, encouraged them and said, well, since you're from the town, I can't really do much for you, but there's another young man, a graduate student here, who you might want to meet and get to know, because he's looking at the same kinds of things you are and interested in these newfangled ideas, rockets, by the name of Frank Malina. Frank Malina had come from Texas, was a graduate student under von Karman, and assisted him in various things. So the three of them got together and started talking, Malina, Parsons, and Forman, and got the idea, well, one of the things that we need to do is let's build rockets. Well, Malina's temperament was theoretical versus Parsons and Forman's of let's fire them off, so they kind of compromised. They ended up working for the next year or so, gathering the parts, scrounging. They didn't have a lot of money, and Malina had to do it in his spare time, and I guess Parsons and Forman did too, working as they were with explosives. But they built a small liquid fuel motor, and they set it up in a test stand. The motor itself fired skyward, not downward toward the earth, but rather skyward, and what they were trying to do was develop a motor and determine how much thrust it had. Well, in the fall of 1936 and then into January of 37, in the Arroyo Seco, up above the Rose Bowl, in the riverbed, no one lived here, no housing, no buildings, just open, flat, empty land, a good safe place to build a motor that might blow up. They tested this little motor, and Parsons took some notes, and Malina did some calculations, and Forman did the machining for the motor itself, and they brought along another couple of friends. A guy by the name of Amos Smith came to carry the oxygen cylinders, and a guy by the name of whose name I forget at the moment, came along because he had a truck that they could move things around. And the five of them worked on this. Malina brought some other guys along at some of the other days that they were here, some other graduate students, some graduate assistants. Anyway, out of all of this came a test that they looked at and said, hey, can we do more than this? It wasn't much to begin with, but it's considered the beginning of JPL.